Good evening and welcome to the Legion Cantina. In today's episode, I'm going to be running through a unit guide for the X-34 Landspeeder for the Rebel faction in Star Wars Legion. So we're back. It's been a while. Haven't done one of these in a bit, but yeah, kind of blasted through a lot of the Rebel units quite quickly, and now just kind of circling back to some of the ones I maybe didn't do in full detail. I will be doing some of the updated units as well fairly soon, but yeah, there's just been loads of other stuff to talk about. But yeah, feels good to get back to one of these. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into the Landspeeder. One of my favorite units, I'm going to say in the entire game, definitely in the Rebel faction, and it's not always immediately obvious why it's so good and so much fun, but yeah, I'll try and go through some reasons why it's good, why it's not so good, some like recommended builds for it, and then how you can use it in a list and how you can use it on the board. But yeah, its strengths. It's got speed 2, it's got a fairly big base, and it's a speeder, so it can cover pretty ridiculous distance pretty quickly. And I've talked before about how units that have abilities that proc off movement are really, really good in game, because it is very rare in a game of Star Wars Legion now that during a unit's activation it won't have to move. I think there are some support commanders in some lists that maybe not so much won't have to move, and then maybe like if you've got a tank or aquas or something like on a sort of POI, you won't have to move. But for almost everything else, especially for the more flimsy stuff, you're going to want to be moving, and you're going to want to be using the ability to move to kind of give you more angles and more threat range, which I think is something the Landspeeder does really well. So the key bits to the Landspeeder that make it as strong as it is are its speed. The armor 2 is actually okay. I think a lot of armor 2 units are slightly underpointed right now. Like the ATRTs used to be, Aquas, whatever, moving on. And like the Landspeeder as well. I think they were all like slightly undercosted initially. I think now probably a bit better balanced, but I think this one is just tougher than people realize, and especially cover 1. And if you take the upgrade to give it cover 2, it can really cling on quite well, because there's 2 ways to deal with armor, and especially low levels of armor. You very often will just rely on weight of dice to get over the top of armor 2 rather than using like specific armor tech, because often actually your armor tech doesn't matter that much against armor 2, because you won't have enough impact to get your dice through unless you're shooting with an ATRT or something, at which point you're just relying on a small elite dice pool. So I'm going to use Aquas as an example because it's the one that's come to mind. But for Aquas, even though they do have some anti-armor tech with the heavy, that often doesn't matter against the Landspeeder because they won't have enough impact to get rid of that armor 2, if that makes sense. So it's very often just going to be weight of dice that kills this rather than anti-armor tech. So that means that cover 1, or heavy cover if you take the upgrade, by removing that weight of dice, you effectively are just taking off sort of pure hits rather than something, for instance, with armor 5, where the anti-armor tech matters a lot more because there is that just larger armor value. So the combo I really like to run with the Landspeeder is with Lair to Exemplar Dodge, which doesn't exactly give it armor 3, but kind of does give it armor 3. And then with the heavy cover as well. So say you get hit by, I don't know, 8 or 9 dice. Let's say a sleep cell shot you. 8 or 9 dice. With heavy cover, you normally get rid of 3. Then if you've got a dodge and armor 2, you're getting rid of another 3. And then you're only rolling 3 dice in defense, which means you probably only take 2 wounds, which is really nice. And like, I think actually, if you compare that to an armor 5 vehicle, say like an ATST, they have armor 5, so they would get rid of 5 of those hits, but they would still have 4 coming through, which means they might still take like 2 or 3 hits, so they would actually take a very similar amount of damage. So the Landspeeder and the Exemplar dodges can be a really nice combo for just taking those larger dice pools and kind of reducing the damage you're going to take. But you're running the Landspeeder for its damage, and I'll talk more about the combos later, but with the rocket launcher and with the crit ion gun, the range 4 one, can't remember what it's called, you're normally good for 5 hits through armor, like I've said a couple of times, and that's really strong. It's really powerful, and it means that with the ability to double tap from the unstable astromech, which again I'll talk about later on, you can realistically do 10 hits through armor, which is just so much damage. And I've been trying, double Landspeeder a bit recently, and the ability to, on average, yes, with sometimes you low roll, sometimes you high roll, but to put roughly sort of 18 to 20 hits through armor on turn one means you can kill any armored vehicle if they leave it out in the open. Like, they're not going to do that, obviously, but if they do, if they try and be a bit more aggressive, like, just having that threat range is so powerful. And with your free sort of your compulsory move onto the board, you still have 2 actions left. So it's very, very typical with a Landspeeder to compulsory onto the board, aim, shoot. And then the turn after that, you aim, shoot, and compulsory. And it's really difficult for your opponent to actually do anything about that, because even though Rebel order control isn't great, you can normally give at least one of your Landspeeders an order on turn 1, just with standing orders. So that means it's coming on pretty late, and thanks to like the activation padding basically that you can do in Rebels, it means it's coming on later, and it just means it's really hard to stop it doing what it's going to do. And when its threat range is effectively the entire board, if you're willing to move up and be a bit more aggressive, like, yeah, it's a really tricky one to deal with. And I just really enjoy having it in all of my lists now. And I think I don't think it's better than Pathfinders were, but I think it offers the thing that Pathfinders offered with maybe a bit more versatility in the late game. So that's really nice. The other option you have, if you're not building the sort of full kit, all singing, all dancing Landspeeder, is just to run it dirt cheap with no upgrades. And at that point, it's 55 points. Normally 56, because you would normally take the rifle gunner for 1 point. But at that point, it's like 1 or 2 points more than the ATRT. It moves quicker. It gets cover 1. And it would actually be able to shoot if you really needed it to, with only 4 white dice surge to hit, but at least it would have something. Yeah, it's really strong, and I think like just having a pure objective playing Landspeed. I think there was a list that I can't remember if it was Worlds or something, but that ran I think at least one just objective Landspeeder, but there's not actually a lot you can kind of do. Like, you can do 3 speeds, 2 moves with this, and that is just ridiculously far. Kind of what I've talked about with swoops before, but just the ability to jump across the board like that when you need to is really powerful. And yeah, I don't know. I think I haven't actually tried myself the pure objective Landspeeders, but I think it is an interesting idea. And I think as I do start to experiment more with having 2 Landspeeders in a list, I think having one full kit to actually shoot and one with no kit just to kind of jump up and score objectives could potentially be really interesting. So yeah, if you're not willing to kind of put all your eggs in one basket and spend 110 points on this, just spend 55, 56 points on it, and I think it can be nearly as effective. Yeah, that's kind of the strengths of the Landspeeder. The weaknesses. While I did say that it was pretty cheap in its base form, as soon as you start to put some kit on it, the cost obviously does go up very quickly. Normally this will come in about 110 if you're taking Astro, the rocket launcher, and the crit ion gun. I should really look what it's called, otherwise I'm going to have to keep referencing it. The M45 ion blaster, there you go, that's what it's called. That gets you to 110, and then you can add the heavy cover pilot and link targeting ray as well, which I quite like just because it's quite order hungry. So yeah, I think at 110, 120 points, it starts to feel like, whoa, that's a bit of an investment. Like, that puts it into like good hero territory. And yeah, it's an interesting one to run. But I think for its versatility and its threat range, it is still definitely worth it. And if you haven't tried it, give it a go, because it is something to behold. While I have talked about it being surprisingly tough, it can also just never roll any saves and just blow up. You do rely on a lot of white saves with this, both in cover and its actual raw saves on the vehicle itself, and especially if you're taking the heavy cover pilot, which again I should look up what it's called, the Atherim speed jockey on it. It can white saves are a tricky one, because you should never expect to make them, is the kind of approach you should have. But also inherently in this, if you are taking the speed jockey and you're hoping it survives, you are hoping to make some white saves, and that just sets you up for disappointment essentially, because sometimes they do just completely fade and just not show up at all, and you can end up with 120 points just dying to like some annoying plink damage or something. So it's a tricky one, but I think it is still worth it on balance, and you do just have to rely on hopefully the dice are vaguely close to average if you're rolling enough of them. The other thing is it doesn't have a free pivot because it's not a ground vehicle, and that makes it trickier to get it where you want to be. One trick that you kind of can use a bit with the Landspeeder is because it's actually quite low profile in terms of its model, you can actually get it behind line of sight blocking sometimes, and especially on that second turn, after you've done your aim shoot, if you can do a speed 2 to get it behind a building or something, it's actually quite difficult to get around to it, and it might, mean they can't shoot it with their big tank or their big squad or whatever, so it might just keep it alive for that extra turn, and that could be really nice. So yeah, you just need to plan ahead. You need to think about, you really don't want to waste an action pivoting. You really don't. You love an aim on this vehicle and you want to be taking advantage of your move and your shoot. Like, you have to shoot if you're full kitting this every time. Like, it just has to happen. Otherwise you're not getting value. So on that basis, you need to get it into a position where after it has shot on turn 2, it's behind a building, it's behind line of sight blocking, so you can have it around for the next turn. Otherwise it will just get blown up. The other thing is you have to move. So the compulsory is great on turn 1, and then I think it can still be good later in the game. But sometimes on that turn 2, you don't want to move forward because often the Landspeeder might be activating quite early in the turn, and that sometimes means you're just jumping further towards your opponent after you've shot. And that can be problematic because where you really want to be with a Landspeeder is kind of at range 4, just plinking your opponent and being really annoying. What you don't want to do is run towards them where they can take advantage of their range 2 and stuff like that and just blow you up in one shot. So it is a tricky one to manage, and like, it does take some getting used to, but flanks are great, or if you're moving up the center, just shooting and then kind of moving out to a flank is always good, because essentially this Landspeeder is really good at robbing actions from tanks and things like that, but you don't want to like stand and fight with them particularly because they will just be a bit tougher, they'll have more health, and they will be able to kill you quicker than you can kill them. So you need to kind of take advantage of your range and your maneuverability over a typical tank. Moving over to how you can kit them, so I kind of already hinted at this, but option 1 is just the budget Landspeeder, so you literally just take the rifle gunner, 56 points, it's a great objective player, as I've said. And yeah, it will surprise you. Like, I think it's really tough. And the nice thing about the Landspeeder as well is you don't really care if you get damaged that much because you're still getting your compulsory move and probably a shoot after that as well. So you can still kind of do what you need to do. Same goes with Ion. Like, if you're Ioned and you're damaged, it starts to become more of a problem because then you're literally only getting your compulsory. But again, if it comes to that and your Landspeeder is still alive, then that's fine. Like, it's kind of done its job. So yeah, legging this, turn 2, it could definitely make it to every objective on the board thanks to its speed. So it could be an annoying one for your opponent to deal with, and yeah, an interesting one to try if you've not tried it. How I run my Landspeeders, kind of already explained this. Astro, Iron Blaster, Rocket Gunner, 5 hits through armor. You can do it at range 4. It's great. It's so good, and yeah, it'll shred buses. It's actually not even that bad against snails because if with the defense protocols, because your damage comes through in kind of one big shot, the dodge is less impactful than, say, if you're shooting it with an ATRT. Because if you ATRT laser cannon, you normally hit for like 2.5, and they're guaranteed to dodge one of those. So you might only be hitting for 1.5, which on average is maybe a wound if you're lucky. Whereas with the Landspeeder, because you're normally good for 5 through armor, even if they dodge one, they're still rolling 4, which is probably 3 wounds. And with the way white saves are, it might be 4 wounds. So that's significantly more impactful. And while obviously you pay more for a Landspeeder, it's nice having those sort of big hits of damage sometimes rather than just relying on, small efficient dice pools. So there's definitely still a space for the ATRT with the laser cannon, but I think just the Landspeeder maybe has that bit more output in terms of dealing with those bigger vehicles. Then the final one with full kit. This does push it to 125, but this is with the speeder jockey and link targeting array. It's really good, and I've run this Landspeeder before, and it survives a little bit longer. I think basically with the outer rim speed jockey is if it makes your Landspeeder survive one more turn or gets you one more attack, it's immediately value. If it doesn't do that, obviously it has no value, but it can sometimes be really close whether or not it brings in that value. And I think on average it probably is worth it because I think it probably gives the Landspeeder like 1 or 2 extra wounds on average. And for 10 points, I'd probably take that. Like, if my Landspeeder costed 65 points and had 8 white health, I'd probably take that. So probably is just about worth it. But again, you're relying on dice and it won't always pay off. So kind of a decision up to you and whether or not you have the points to spend on it. In terms of list building, basically the Landspeeder just creates a lot of space in the early game. It forces, well, it can force your opponent back unless they accept they're going to be shot by the Landspeeder and just move into it and accept it. Which means that while it might not create that much space necessarily, your opponent is still sacrificing in a way, because you will just be able to, you'll probably shoot it twice with thanks to the unstable Astro with your Landspeeder. So it will be able to slow down a big tank or something. And that is quite nice, to just have that big threat range. You know, it's why Pathfinders were so good. Just having threat range of effectively the entire board on turn 1 is just really strong. Landspeeders are quite order hungry. Like, they're going to be a priority target for your opponent pretty much the entire game. So you want to be able to control when they go. And, you know, if it takes an unexpectedly big hit from something, you want to be able to go with it straight away before it dies, because they can just fold quite quickly. Like, they're not the kind of unit that you can rely on being there throughout the entire game. So order hungry while it's alive, normally until the end of like turn 2, and then it blows up, but it's kind of done its job by then. So yeah, just be prepared to not necessarily be able to go with other things early on that you might that might otherwise be more order hungry than you would expect. They'll, as I've said, they'll draw fire, and that can give your other unit space. Like, in this list on the right hand side, I think this is almost exactly the list I took to the GT. Pretty much, yeah. Basically, in this list, thanks to the space created by the Landspeeder, it can just sometimes let you get the AA5, and as a result, Mando resistance further at the board than you might expect. And then once Mando resistance have kind of jumped up that bit closer, they just become such a pain to deal with, and that kind of 6 red surging health and all that kind of stuff. Like, there are lots of high value targets in this list, and it's sometimes just quite hard for your opponent to select which one. Especially when they're all as tough as they are and are getting the exemplar dodges and all that kind of stuff. So it does feel really nice. And yeah, this list was really fun to run. For anybody who hasn't tried this kind of combination yet, I imagine it will be a fairly common list, though, running around at the moment, thanks to the points changes. As I've said, amazing exemplar target, as with any like tank or big vehicle with long range and a decentish health pool. Like, those dodges can go a long way, because it's probably going to need to be shot 2 or 3 times. That means you can spend the 2 or 3 dodges on layer, which might just slow your opponent down again and stuff like that. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about like when dodges are valuable recently, and I used to I was like, why would you bother giving dodges to Mando resistance when they already have such really good saves? But the reason is because they have those really good saves, they're going to be shot more times, which means there's more opportunity for the dodgers to get value. But yeah, I don't quite know how that all balances out. Like, essentially, you want to spend dodges on a unit that it's worth spending them on to help them survive, but then Mando resistance maybe don't need the dodge as much to the stuff. So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one, but the Landspeeder does love a dodge and an aim. If you can get an aim on this dice pool, it maybe just helps you. Like, if you roll dreadfully, which can sometimes happen, it just digs you out, and also can help, you know, fish for an extra crit on that white dice or something, which also feels really nice. And my current combo is the AA5 and the Landspeeder together, but I think double Landspeeder is also completely valid and a bit obnoxious as well. Like, the damage turn 1 against any armor is just pretty wild, so it can feel really nice to have that. But the AA5 with the unorthodox and the transport and stuff is also a really nice utility, so I think they're a really nice pair to have early game. In terms of how I'd use them in game, basically you just want to hunt your opponent's armor. Don't worry too much about other stuff. Like, the weird thing with the Landspeeder is, in some ways, they deal more damage to units with armor than units that don't, because in general, units with armor will be vehicles that won't get cover. So because your keywords are so good on the Landspeeder, i.e. impact 3, crit 1, and iron 1, you'd normally just value shooting a tank or something anyway, because actually your keywords don't mean that much when you're just shooting at infantry. You definitely can, and it's still good for, you know, normally 5 or 6 hits, but it is just sometimes, you know, it feels better shooting at armor essentially. So on this board, basically you can actually use, thanks to the way the deployments work on Close the Pocket, it actually maybe buys you a bit of space using the sort of Landspeeder's Speeder 2 to move onto the board. So here, maybe come on the left-hand side, and then just use whatever dodges and aims you can exemplar from Leia and Wicket to kind of shoot at that ATST turn 1. I mean, it's unlikely they'd bring, well, actually, if you've got more axe, then they may not have a choice. But if you can bring on your Landspeeder after your opponent's armor, that is just an absolute game changer. I think it's one of the examples of why Advanced Intel is as strong as it is, because that can be such a huge flip between getting to shoot your opponent's armor and not getting to shoot your opponent's armor. But yeah, here basically you target that ATST. If you can put an iron on it, and if even you're able to damage it, like absolutely go for it. Basically, you want an aim per shot is the way I always think about the Landspeeder. So if you can exemplar at least one aim from Leia on your first shot, then maybe save the second one to see, like, if you do want to double tap, having that aim on it could be super valuable. Double tapping without an aim is valid, but it is quite high risk because you do just want that aim to increase your consistency. So if the Landspeeder has access to a couple of aims, that's probably enough to consider a double tap, but you could always just save it for the second round if you think you'll have better aim access in the second round, and that might just be a better way to go. You do want to use your double tap though, because as I said, the Landspeeder will get blown up, and you may as well just try and deal as much damage as you can, even if it involves some self-inflicted damage as well. For Recover the Research, again, it's a tricky one because you want to end up on the flank essentially, but you also want to shoot your opponent's armor. So here I'd almost be tempted to start in the center, but then after you've moved onto the board, you stay obviously in arc on the big ATST, but then after that you probably want to try and branch off to the left on this board, I guess, and maybe try and get behind sort of this big building on the left hand side. The alternative is maybe moving up the center and ending up behind this building here, but then you're kind of in range of maybe your opponent's sort of closer range units, and Vader will slice through your Landspeeder in one turn, for instance, stuff like that. So it again, this board's fairly tricky because you do want to take advantage of the keywords you have against armor, but you also don't want to end up like charging straight up the center. So maybe it's just deploying on this left hand side and then trying to shoot the ATST as many times as you can, and then branching off to the left to avoid your opponent's main damage source. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you can't tell already, just Landspeeder is an absolute blast, and definitely worth a go if you've not tried it already, especially if you are looking for something to maybe help you against some armor or some vehicles that may be running around at the moment. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. Like, subscribe, etc., and I will see you for the next one.